What's up, my Beardos and Weirdos? OneTopic here. And today we're diving into that favorite subreddit that was so requested in the poll. r/NuclearRevenge. We're going through a few stories. They're on screen now. Let's get started. A friend set up my dad and he was nearly beaten to death. My grandfather got revenge on everyone involved. In TLDR, my dad was nearly beaten to death and my grandfather went nuclear on everyone involved. This isn't my story, but it comes from my dad and other family members who witnessed it. Background. This all went down in the late 1970s, when my dad was 17. The area he grew up in was in the UK, and was a stereotypical working class town. The part of town my family lived in was run down, full of poor families and had its fair share of crime. But it was close-knit and everyone knew everyone. This will be important later. Now, my dad wasn't the most well-behaved kid, and he hated being at school. But aside from a speeding ticket, he had never been in trouble with the police. He was, and still is, a very talented musician, and had a very active social life. For his 17th birthday, one of his friends had bought him a leather jacket with a very specific logo on it. We'll call this friend Dave for future reference. Fuck Dave. According to my dad, it was a rare and quite expensive motorcycle jacket. He was extremely happy that Dave had got it for him. Dave had bought himself the same jacket a while before, and it was a big surprise. My grandmother apparently joked that with the jackets on they looked like twins, and she wasn't far wrong. They had similar features, black hair, and were both well known for being kitted out in motorcycle gear. A few days after my dad's birthday, he was leaving work as a bartender in the town center at around 10 p.m. As he was getting close to where his bike was parked, a gang of 5 men approached him from behind. The last thing my dad remembers was being smacked over the head and passing out as he hit the floor. These men beat up my dad with bike chains and a crowbar, literally to within an inch of his life. Luckily, 2 bouncers from a nearby pub had heard the commotion and rushed to help. The men ran off, the bouncers called the cops, and my dad was taken to hospital. It turned out that Dave had quite a substantial gambling habit, and owed a large amount of money to people who you really didn't want to owe money to. They had threatened Dave and told him that they would be looking for him to teach him a lesson. So Dave decided to set up my dad to take the beating instead of himself, or at least lessen his chances of taking it. He had bought my dad the same jacket because these guys knew that was what he wore when he rode. He then arranged for a guy he knew to find out when my dad left work and call up the loan sharks to let them know where Dave was. What a scumbag. The revenge. My grandfather and grandmother were obviously distraught about this whole thing. The first thought on my grandfather's mind was if my dad would survive. When that was answered, his second was how to best get revenge. Bit of a background on my grandfather. He was a lifelong boxer and a career military man. He enlisted at the back end of World War II at 17. Stayed in the forces through Korea, and then served in Malaya and Burma as a scout and sniper during the mid to late 1950s. He only reluctantly retired when my dad was little and worked as an engineer after his discharge. This guy was a certified badass, even into his 50s. And although he wasn't the best husband or father at times, he could never stand by and watch his family get hurt. The first move my grandfather made was to call up every ex-service buddy, bouncer, pub landlord, etc. that he knew, and even a few less than legit characters he knew from the pubs. In my town, word traveled fast, and my grandfather was well liked and had a bit of a reputation, so it wasn't long before he had the names and addresses of the 5 men who attacked my dad. Apparently, these guys had been bragging about beating up a defenseless man from behind. These guys were career criminals with violent reputations, but my grandfather really didn't give a shiz who or what they were. My grandfather then called up a few of the most dangerous, hardened guys he knew from the service. He explained to them what had happened, and they were all happy to help. One night, the group kicked in the doors of each thug and beat them to a pulp. All 5 of them. They knew that if they hit one, the others would hear about it and run, so they hit all 5 of them in one night. My grandfather knew that no one would call the police in the area they lived in. Talking to the cops was a big no-no in that area back then, so there was little chance of being caught. All 5 guys ended up with bloodied and broken bones, shattered teeth, and the requirement to be fed from a tube by the end of the night. One of them had to be put into a medically induced coma. Of course, the police interviewed all of them in the hospital when they sufficiently recovered, but none of them talked. Both out of fear of my grandfather and fear that they would be labeled as rats, and nothing came of it. But my grandfather wasn't done there. My grandfather used his connections in the clubs and bars to start spreading rumors about why they had been beaten up. Soon it had gotten round that these 5 guys had fused up and had beaten up the wrong person. Not only that, but they had bragged about it and lied to whoever they worked for about it. Not only were they physically broken, but my grandfather ruined their credibility so that when they got out, no one, criminal or otherwise, wanted to be associated with them. Once this was all done, my grandfather turned his attention to Dave. He had specifically left Dave for last, knowing that he would shiz himself knowing that my grandfather knew what he had done. My grandfather, however, was much more subtle in dealing with Dave, as he thought that a simple beating would be too good for him. He waited and asked around, and it turned out that Dave was not only a compulsive gambler, but also had recently turned into a heavy drug addict as well. My grandfather found out who he was buying his drugs from, when he would usually buy, and where. He had a buddy of his follow Dave when he went to buy his stuff, follow him to where he was living, and let my grandfather know. My grandfather then called in an anonymous tip that there was a huge drug deal going on in that address, and he thought he heard gunshots. He got at least 2 of his buddies to do the same. The police investigated, searched the house, and caught Dave red-handed with boatloads of drugs in his home, as well as counterfeit bills and a ton of other illegal stuff. Dave was charged, denied bail, and ended up pleading guilty to all the charges laid against him. My dad could never remember his exact sentence, but it was definitely heavy, at least 15 years. To add to that, Dave owed a lot of money to a lot of people, and let's just say his time in prison was made much worse by that fact. My dad never spoke to him again. His parents disowned him, his girlfriend dumped him, he struggled to get a job with his record, and when he got out, he had to move miles away as no one he knew wanted anything to do with him. My dad eventually recovered from his injuries, although you can still see various scars on his body from the beating he took. My grandfather never told anyone about what he had done until my dad asked him about it when he got really ill in the early 1990s. Dave's life was ruined, and out of the 5 who attacked my dad, 3 ended up in prison later in life, and 2 ended up dead due to crime. My grandfather passed away in the late 1990s, and although my dad and him had their issues, it could never be said he didn't look out for him when he needed it. Damn, OP, that is a heck of a story. It's always amazing when you know you've got a family member that will do anything to look out for you. That is incredibly invaluable, and I'm so glad that your dad had that, especially when he needed it at that time. At the age of 17, to have your friend totally sell you out, get you beaten up, and nearly killed. Oh, I can only hope that if that ever happens to me, I'd have someone as tough as your grandfather looking out for me. Great story, OP. Thanks for sharing that one. Alright, next story. Rule number 1, don't cheat on me. I've been reading the posts here for a couple of weeks, and I think it's time I contributed one of my own. Didn't want to wait for the 7-day rule. TLDR at the bottom, yada yada yada. In 2008, I met this amazingly awesome girl in school. Let's call her CR. I was 21, and she was just about to turn 19. And we both knew what love was for the first time in our lives. We were both going to community college. Me for theater design, and her for education. We lived about half an hour apart, but that was nothing more than a minor inconvenience because we spent every few moments between classes together. Come to think of it, that slight distance was actually pretty nice, because being home at least forced us to focus on homework and taking care of ourselves, and visiting each other at home was that much more special. CR graduated with her associates in 2009 and moved away to a state school to finish up her degree in early childhood special education. Like before, the distance was not a concern because it was a short train ride away and I'd spend 1 or 2 weekends a month down there with her. I proposed to her on Valentine's Day 2010. School wasn't really my thing and I ended up enlisting in the USAF that following May and got moved halfway across the country to a place neither of us had ever imagined visiting. However, like before, we wouldn't let distance get in our way. Now, it should be noted that her mom did not like me. I still don't know why, but she was always the loudest, rudest, most annoying, and disrespectful person I've ever met. She was from the city, and she married into a family of farmers that owned the land since the 1870s. so that may explain part of her malice. From here on, Evil Beche is EB. Another thing to know is that I have a great memory, and this will be important later on in the story. Anyway, back to the military. I had a 2-week break between my training and leaving for my first, and only, duty station. Which just happened to be over Christmas and New Year's. Even though we were engaged, we really hadn't put any consideration into actually getting married. She wanted something small with her family and cousins, and I was completely okay with going to a courthouse and getting it over with. I didn't want to sound like I was trying to pressure her into that, but the way I saw it, I would be living in a barracks in a few weeks, and being married would get me a full monthly housing allowance, which I would save to have a wedding ceremony when we had time in another year or two. And basically, get married now, don't tell anyone, because they would all get hella upset for not being involved, and fake a wedding ceremony that would include both of our families and friends. It turns out that because I was living in barracks, I wasn't allowed to collect the housing allowance. And when, 6 months later, they realized I was actually married, kicked me out, and made me get a house on base. Either way, we didn't get married when I was home on leave and took an Amtrak train out west. I highly recommend traveling cross-country by train if you have the time. The first time we were able to see each other after that was during her spring break, which was the first part of March. CR and I finally eloped in a courthouse and spent the next few days glued to each other. Hand in glove style, like every young married couple should. I flew back home for a couple weeks in June, and this is when things started to unravel. Easter Seals, for those who don't know, run summer camps for special needs kids, and my new wife volunteered to be a counselor for the last 7 weeks of summer. The last time I saw her that summer was just after her June birthday, when I dropped her off at camp. The rest of the summer was hit or miss getting in touch with her since she was on the clock 24 hours a day for 5 days a week, and I completely understood her commitment to those kids. When she was back in school the following fall, she became increasingly distant, making excuses about how her phone would be randomly dead at oddly predictable times every week. She flew out to spend Christmas with me in our new house, technically a shizzy, mostly empty duplex, and things felt amazing, like they had been. After that, however, she went back to being super reclusive like she was the previous semester. Fast forward to May 2012, I took a whole month of leave to fly home for her graduation, and to help her move in with me. I barely recognized her. Every part of CR's communication with me was forced and so phony that I should have known what was really happening all along. She had set up what she called mock interviews with a couple grade schools near her hometown, and I actually believe that she was doing it just to get experience interviewing. What an idiot. When I finally started to catch on about how serious she was about getting a job in our home state, she broke down crying and made it seem like I was forcing her to choose between me and her career. And of course, I wanted to put our marriage before anything else. Obviously, I returned to base without her. A couple weeks later, I pressured her into telling me what the heck was going on. She fell in love with one of her fellow camp counselors and let the affair go on for about 9 months, with claims that she was going to tell me but didn't know when. The usual, too guilty to tie your own shoes bullshit. And she honestly expected me to walk away from our relationship right then and there. No. I fought tooth and nail to hold us together for 2 months before filing the divorce. I'm skipping a bunch of sappy details here, but the divorce was filed late August and became final that December. Mandatory 90-day waiting period in my state. The pain I suffered in that one-sided relationship is something I would never wish on anybody unless that truly deserved it. Apparently EB whispered all kinds of lies to her about how I joined the military to get away from her and actually had the gall to blame me for all the crying and misery her oldest child was going through. My soon-to-be ex never admitted who was blaming me for everything, but I was really close to her dad and siblings, so I can't imagine that they would ever suspect me. But EB was so manipulative that by Halloween they had all turned against me. At that point, I had it. I was near suicidal and my anxiety attacks were hitting basically every day. I was miserable, tired of being lied to, tired of the slander, tired of the bad guy when I was the one who was attacked here. It started with sending texts to her brothers and sisters saying, "Hey, I'm actually your brother-in-law. Nice to know that we don't keep secrets, right?" CR exploded. But that was just the beginning. I wrote a 3,000-word letter explaining in every detail I could recall exactly what happened. the fact that we were married, including copies of the marriage license and certificates, our plans for the future, and how I was the only one living up to our expectations. Where she met the guy she was fusing behind my back, his name, address, phone number, camp counselor name, so CR would have a harder time refuting it, and a bunch of other information that she made me keep secret from them. I sent copies to everyone in her extended family. Well, everyone I had an address for. Her roommates, the summer camp she worked at, close professors she had brought up in old conversations, and the principal of the school she ended up working at. Calling the fallout catastrophic is an understatement. Her super devout Catholic family basically disowned her, her reputation at her former school was shattered, and the tension at her new job was apparently high enough that CR was forced to resign from her position before Christmas break started. Getting those secrets off my chest was the most cathartic moment of my life. TLDR, my ex-wife and I got married in secret but never lived together. She cheated on me for almost a year, and I got disowned by her family and forced out of her first teaching job by telling everyone she was close to every dirty secret I could remember. Dang, OP. I won't say that's a healthy reaction to being cheated on. For all my Beardos and Weirdos out there who have been cheated on, it definitely sucks. And there's never one good, easy reason for it. And if your partner happens to be a coward like the one depicted in this story, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have the right to ruin their life. So I would caution against this, but still a great story and some sweet revenge. OP, I'm sorry that things didn't work out. And I hope that not only did you both grow from this experience, but you both learned something. Relationships are tough. When it doesn't work out, it sucks. But yeah, thanks for writing that. We'll see you in a future story, I'm sure. Alright, my Beardos and Weirdos, that was 2 excellent stories from the r/NuclearRevenge subreddit. This is definitely one of my favorite subs, and I'm really glad that everyone voted on this one. I will mention in that poll that everyone answered, there were quite a few comments asking for r/Vax happened, so I'm going to do my best to make that the next video. Alright, my Beardos and Weirdos, thanks for checking out another video. We'll see you in the next one, where we take it one topic at a time. Roll that outro!
Also want to mention I did set up a Patreon. I'm looking at investing in some new equipment. I thought you guys, hey, if you enjoy the channel, maybe you want to support it. And if you don't, that's alright too. But I wanted to give you a look at what it would look like if you did. To my regular fans, thank you so much. Every name on the board here is one of my regular fans.
And my super fan, Ross Vegas. Tammy Bledsoe.
Omega fans. 1, 2, 3, your name could be here. Totally original sounding name. Not too many numbers in this name. One I clearly don't know how to pronounce. Another unpronounceable name.
And now, alright, my Beardos and Weirdos, that was just something fun to whip together. I thought, hey, why not? If you like supporting the channel, that'd be awesome. If you just want to listen in, that's okay too. I'm making these videos for fun. I will be looking at investing in new equipment in the future. It's just taking me a bit of time to set aside that money. If you want to support that, that'd be awesome. Let me know in the comments below what videos you want to see next. We had some awesome stories today, and I was really happy to be reading them out. The stories are linked in the description, so give those guys a shout out. They're awesome. And hopefully we'll be seeing you in the next video, where we take it one topic at a time.